Hey, it's the Dynasty Fantasy Football Strategist back at you with another video. In the last video, I summarized what the channel will cover. In this video, we will discuss startup strategies and partake in a mock startup draft. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. So, there's macro ideas and micro ideas that I would like to talk about. In terms of macro ideas, I would like to talk about the win now approach, the young approach, the mixed age approach, and the punt approach. So by win now, you are drafting older players who have more secure roles in their offenses while getting immediate production so that you can win now as soon as this year. A young approach is where you draft younger players who will have more longevity because they're younger, but they may not necessarily have a role right away depending on where they are in the depth chart. The mixed age approach is where you draft a mixture of vets and young players that allows you to win now potentially, but also gives you a chance to have a better team for a longer period of time. There's also the punt approach, which is trading down for value. So if I have a first round pick in this startup, I could trade down to the second or third round and get future picks involved, or get better picks within the next couple of rounds. But this is a mock startup that I'm going to do, so there's not going to be any trading because it involves CPU players and it's not a real league. So in terms of micro ideas, that's the initial startup roster construction. So there's double QB, double running back, double receiver. These are various strategies where you can pick the same type of position. There's a mixed approach where you could do running back, quarterback, and so on and so forth. You might have noticed that I don't mention tight end, and that's because I don't generally value tight ends that much. The disparity between the best tight end and a solid tight end in total points scored per week isn't going to be very much as opposed to other positions. So I'm going to be using a super flex for this mock draft, which means that there's a starting quarterback and a super flex, which means you can start a quarterback there or a tight end, running back, or wide receiver. Now it's optimal to be able to start two quarterbacks because they generally score the most points, and that's optimal for your lineup. Now, in terms of value, quarterbacks in a super flex are going to be the most valuable position because there's only 32 starters. And the amount of teams in the league dictates whether or not quarterback is even more valuable or just the most valuable. So in a 10-man league, everyone can have 3 quarterbacks because there's 32 starters, and in a 10-man, if you want to have a starter, a superflex, and a backup in case your starter gets injured or you have a bye week with either your starter or superflex, everyone can have 3 starters. Now in a 12 or greater man league, there's only 32 starters, but say in a 12-man league, there's only 32 starters, but if each team wanted to have 3, there would be 36. So not every team is going to have 3 starters. So it makes them much more valuable. And in the mock draft we will be partaking in, it'll be a 12-man league. So it's going to be imperative that I do get 3 starting quarterbacks. So in terms of tight ends, like I was saying, the disparity between an elite tight end and a good one isn't very much. So I'm going to be waiting to draft a tight end unless one that's an elite one becomes a great value. Personally preferred strategies. I personally prefer to draft a quarterback, wide receiver, or some combination of those two within the first 2 picks. I don't like to draft running back within the first couple of picks because it's generally a win now approach that doesn't have much longevity, and the older running backs get, the less trade value they have, and you have less of a shelf life with them anyways because of the brutal nature of being a running back to the NFL. So I'm going to avoid drafting running back within the first 2 rounds for that reason. So another thing, in terms of roster construction, you want to have 3 starting quarterbacks, you want to have 6+ startable receivers, you want to have 2 tight ends, 1 for starting and 1 in case you have a bye or an injury, and you want to have 9+ running backs. Now you want to have the most running backs of any specific roster on your team because you want to be able to be covered in case there's injuries, and running backs are the most likely position to incur injuries on your team. So we're going to start our mock draft here. So I am going to be pick 10, It's easier for you to pick at pick 1 or pick 12 at either end of the board, because it's more set in stone with what you're going to see. You can pick right next to each other, and it just makes it easier for you. But it gave me pick 10, and I'm going to stay at pick 10. It's a little bit more challenging than either of the direct ending position spots, but it's fine. So we're going to go ahead and start the draft. So, first overall goes C.J. Stroud, quarterback for Houston. I don't really particularly think he should have gone there because he's not, in my opinion, the best quarterback for fantasy anyways. Then Mahomes. Then our first wide receiver goes at 3 in Justin Jefferson. Then 2 more quarterbacks, 2 more receivers, and then 2 more quarterbacks. So that leaves me at pick 10. So, I like to think of players in tiers, and so in terms of tiers remaining, I think that at quarterback, Caleb Williams and Anthony Richardson are in their own tier. I won't be going running back here, but at wide receiver, there's Amon-Ra St. Brown, who I consider a tier 1 receiver, and Marvin Harrison. So I actually consider Amon-Ra St. Brown to be the only elite tier wide receiver that I feel confident in remaining, and so because there's more quarterbacks remaining that I would deem within this tier, I'm going to wait until the next pick to select a quarterback, and I'm going to lock up my elite wide receiver 1 in Amon-Ra St. Brown, who is my wide receiver 4, so I'm getting him at a good value here. So the next, Marvin Harrison goes, Caleb Williams, Jordan Love, and our first running back. So it's interesting. Jordan Love went, who I like as a quarterback, but he does not provide the upside of Anthony Richardson, the quarterback for Indianapolis. He has Shane Steichen, who's an elite play caller around him. He has 3 good wide receivers, a good running back, and a solid offensive line around him. And he has the maximum upside to be the best player in fantasy. He was on pace to score 17 rushing touchdowns, which would be a record at quarterback, which provides a safe floor, as well as in the 2 games in which he played 96+% of the snaps, he was the QB2 and QB4 overall among quarterbacks. And so he averaged 25 points a game in that time, which is the highest average points per game of any player in fantasy. Now, that is a small sample size, so it may not have been 25 points if he had finished the year, but that is a maximum level upside that is unparalleled at this point in the draft. So with that being said, I'm going to select Anthony Richardson here. So a couple running backs go off the board, some more wide receivers. Our first tight end in Sam Laporta, I think that's a mistake. Then another running back and wide receiver. So looking at who is here, there's a couple good running backs, but I'm not going to select running back here. Interesting. So Puka Nacua, who is my wide receiver 7, is here, and there have been 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 wide receivers taken. So I'm getting him at wide receiver 9, and I deem him as wide receiver 7. He's coming off a season in which he finished with a rookie record in terms of catches and receiving yards. That's a quite impressive record as a rookie. He's in a fantastic offense with an elite head coach that is a masterful play caller, and he projects to be the long-term wide receiver 1 with a quarterback that trusts him in Matt Stafford. So then after that, a bunch of wide receivers and quarterbacks go. Then one more running back goes, and so I have 2 wide receivers and 1 quarterback so far. So I'm going to look at the quarterbacks because I do want to secure a couple of them before they are all gone. So of the quarterbacks remaining, I consider Jared Goff to be in his own tier. I consider him to be in the Prescott and Tua Tagovailoa tier, who were picked slightly before this. And so since he's the only player remaining in this tier, I'm going to go ahead and select him to lock up the quarterback position. And Jared Goff is a safe quarterback that doesn't rush at all, really, so he's less likely to get hurt on the run, and he's in a fantastic situation. He just received an extension. He has a masterful play caller as his offensive coordinator in Ben Johnson, And so that's a safe quarterback to kind of counteract the risk that I incurred by drafting Anthony Richardson. So looking at who is left, there are quite a few quarterbacks who I just generally consider to be in the same tier. So I'm going to look at running back. Okay, there's a couple good ones. I really like Jonathan Brooks. I want to see who's left at wide receiver, though. So I have 2 wide receivers already, and there aren't any wide receivers that I consider to be in their own tier. It seems like a massive slew of receivers that are all about the same value. So I'm going to go with running back here, and I'm going to go with Jonathan Brooks. He is the rookie for the Panthers. They just had Dave Canales hired as their head coach, and he has resurrected offenses the past 2 years in different situations. In Seattle with Geno Smith as their quarterback, and in Tampa Bay with Baker Mayfield as their quarterback. And so Bryce Young, the Panthers rookie quarterback this past year, had a terrible season with terrible coaching, no talent around him. And so there's been an influx of talent around him. And Dave Canales has mentioned that he's going to use Jonathan Brooks as a weapon in the passing game as well as the rushing. So for that reason, I'm going to take him as my running back 1. Now, he is coming off an ACL tear, but he's only 20.9 months old, or years old, so he's not going to be any type of age risk here. And with second round draft capital, they're definitely going to use him as a featured back. So after that, a couple more quarterbacks go off, a couple more tight ends, which is too early for my taste. Then a few more wide receivers as well. So looking at what's left, I may lock up a quarterback here, but I'm going to see there's 4 picks after this that are going to be made by the CPU, and I'm going to look at the quarterbacks remaining. I kind of view them all once again in the same tier, so I'll probably wait and see which ones left, if any, get picked at my next pick here. Looking at running back, I like Trey Benson, definitely in his own tier remaining here, so I may go with him. And at wide receiver, there's quite a few that are all within the same tier. And looking at tight end, really there's nobody that presents a value here, so I won't be going there. So I think I'm going to go with Trey Benson here. So he was a 3rd round pick, the top of the first 3rd round this year. And he goes into a situation where they have a rushing quarterback, an elite wide receiver in Marvin Harrison, and a great tight end in Trey McBride. And the incumbent starter, James Conner, is 28 years old, entering his 8th season here. And he has never finished an entire season without injury. So there's a very good shot that Trey Benson has a massive opportunity here, and he could be a league winner. He has a tremendous stiff arm, 4.39 40-yard dash speed. He doesn't get caught in the open field, and he broke PFF's elusiveness record in 2022, which involves evading tackles, and he is shifty as all get out. So with that being said, I have my first 2 running backs locked up, and I think I'm going to go quarterback here to secure my 3rd one. And looking at who is remaining, Bryce Young is here, Kirk Cousins, Will Levis, Stafford. I think I'm going to, let me look at wide receiver just to make sure that there's not another wide receiver that I value way above the others. So I really like Jackson Smith-Njigba this year. I think I'm going to pick him. Reason being is he did project as the 3rd on the wide receiver chart this past year, but Tyler Lockett is aging and he's regressing, and I think Jackson Smith-Njigba is going to overtake him this year and be the 2nd target in this offense, and it's going to be a vertical scheme that's going to attack deep on the outside. And Jackson Smith-Njigba profiles to mostly be a slot receiver that will get a lot of short area targets and will threaten the seam somewhat. But I think he could get a lot of catches this year, and he will help provide a safe floor for me. So at wide receiver 3, I'm going to pick him here. Then a whole bunch of receivers go off the board, which it was probably a good idea to take him now, because that means that there's going to be values, essentially the same value at every other position is remaining there. And so it's going to be a great spot for me to lock up the quarterback position because only 2 went, but there's still not very many remaining that I would feel comfortable starting at least. So I really like Will Levis here. So Will Levis was drafted to the Titans. This year, a couple months ago, they drafted a right tackle to help protect him. They signed Tyler Boyd to be a slot receiver. They signed Calvin Ridley to be their Z receiver, and they have DeAndre Hopkins to be their X receiver. So he has an influx of talent there. They also signed Tony Pollard, the former Dallas running back, to help shore up the running game, so it'll help take some of the load off of him. But I really think that Will Levis takes a giant step up here, and I want to make sure that I have 2 safer quarterbacks so that if Anthony Richardson were to get hurt, I would be able to start multiple quarterbacks. So a couple of wide receivers and a running back go off the board here. So I'm going to look at who is available. So at running back, it is getting kind of thin here, so I may want to go ahead and lock one up. At wide receiver, looking at my team, I have young and win-now pieces in Puka Nacua, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Jackson Smith and Jigba at receiver. I have a high upside quarterback in Anthony Richardson, 2 safer quarterbacks in Jared Goff and Will Levis, and then 2 young high upside running backs in Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson. So I have a mostly young team here, so I'm going to kind of aim for a little bit of a mixed approach strategy, as I was talking about, where I get some veterans and some younger players so that I can lock up some win-now production. And a great opportunity here is I can either stack Calvin Ridley with Will Levis, and stacking, what it does is it provides you with a lot of upside. So if your receiver catches a lot of balls, your quarterback is throwing it to him, so you get a lot of points that way. But it does present risk if your quarterback and receiver have a bad game, then you have 2 spots in your lineup that aren't performing very well. So I'm actually going to avoid that here, and I'm going to pick Amari Cooper, who projects to be the wide receiver 1 for the Browns. And he will be my wide receiver 4, who I may end up putting in the starting lineup depending on how Jackson Smith and Jigba performs in the beginning of the year. Then another quarterback, 3 tight ends, 4 tight ends now, a couple wide receivers and running backs go off the board. So looking at my team, I have 4 wide receivers, 3 quarterbacks, and 2 running backs. I'm going to look at the running back well here. And what I think I'm going to do here is I'm going to draft James Conner, the running back for the Cardinals. And so what I'm going for here is I'm going to look to have both running backs in the Arizona Cardinals backfield so that no matter what, I have the starter with a tremendous amount of upside. That way, almost no matter what, unless both of them get injured, which you can't predict injuries, I'll have a great shot at having a starting running back. Then I'm going to look at wide receiver again. Okay, so somebody that I think is in a tier by themselves at this point is Jalen Polk. He should be the wide receiver 1 this year for the Patriots. Looking at tight end, they're all about the same, so I'll punt on tight end for now. So I'm going to go ahead with Jalen Polk here. That gives me 4 projected wide receiver 1s for their teams, even if they might not finish as wide receiver 1s in fantasy. And being a wide receiver 1 is being either 1st through 12th in this format, because if there's 12 teams, you have 12 wide receiver 1 spots, and he's not going to finish as the 12th best receiver or anything, but he does project to be his own team's wide receiver 1, which will project him to get more targets, and that's important. If you don't get opportunities, you can't score points. So couple more tight ends go, a couple running backs go. I was looking to snag Mostert and Jalen Wright, so that's unfortunate. But looking at who is remaining, I really like Marshawn Lloyd. He was selected in the 3rd round. He has had some fumbling issues, which he will need to correct or he won't get playing time, but he is an athletic specimen with over a 32 BMI who ran less than a 4.5, I think it was a 4.46 40-yard dash this past year. Insane agility. He can run routes too, soft hands, and so he has a lot of upside here. So I'm going to draft him so I can help my team out at the running back position, because you want to have a bunch of possibilities there. Then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 wide receivers. I'm going to look at who is here. There's a couple more wide receivers that I can wait on that I think are all about. Yeah, there's a couple more wide receivers. I think I'll go running back here. And I'm going to select Kamani Vidal. He has a very good shot at getting significant playing time this year for the Chargers. So J.K. Dobbins is a starter ahead of him, but he has gotten hurt every year except his rookie year and missed significant time. He cannot stay healthy. The other running back that is there is Gus Edwards, who is also from the same team as him, who just signed there. And he does not profile to get any passing work because he's a poor receiver. So if J.K. Dobbins does get hurt, the other starter, there's a good chance that I have a running back that gets half of the carries with goal line work opportunities, but most, if not all, of the receiving work, which presents you with way more upside. So thinking about it, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 running backs, and I have 5 wide receivers. I'm going to look at tight end. I don't think I'll select one here. Nah, they're all about the same. Okay, so Dontavian Wicks. He is a wide receiver for Green Bay. He is attached to what projects to be a great quarterback in Jordan Love. He is in a wide open wide receiver room, and he has elite separation skills. And separation skills means getting open against your cornerback or whoever's guarding you. And if you're going to gain the trust of your quarterback, you're generally going to want to be open unless you are just able to absolutely moss people with contested catches. So I really like Dontavian Wicks, and there's a chance he could be the wide receiver 1 for that team at least. So we're going to go with Dontavian Wicks here. A couple running backs go off the board, another tight end. So that leaves me with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 wide receivers, 3 quarterbacks, and 5 running backs. I'm going to go with another running back most likely. So I'm going to go with Audric Estime here. He was selected by Denver in the 4th round, and what matters here is that the running backs ahead of him on the roster were not selected by the current coach, and when you have players that are not necessarily studs, and the players above him theoretically are not studs, and they're not connected to the coach or GM who drafted them, they're not going to be held in as high of regard, and they're much more replaceable. There's been reports that Estime does intend to be used this year, and he has looked better as a receiver, so there's a good chance that he presents some upside here. And speaking of some upside, another running back that I'm going to select here is D'Onta Foreman. The starter ahead of him, Nick Chubb, he was injured with a terrible knee injury this past year during the season, and that's been reported, might not be able to make the beginning of the year. So D'Onta Foreman, he's a big power back. He was signed in the offseason. He projects to be a short yardage and goal line back, which presents touchdown upside, while not necessarily being the best receiver, but he's going to be my running back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I don't need to necessarily worry that much. I just want to make sure I have running backs that present themselves with opportunity for roles in their offenses. So I'm going to lock him up because there aren't very many that still project to have a lot of security in their roles. That leaves me with, at wide receiver, I do like one wide receiver. The tight ends are all the same. I'll wait on that. Running backs, a lot of the upside is already gone. So I'm going to look at wide receiver here. And Curtis Samuel, he's a wide receiver who was just signed by the Bills this offseason. He is in a wide open wide receiver room. He projects to be their Z receiver, and he can be a vertical threat, and they run a vertical offense. Now, the Bills drafted a wide receiver in the top of the second round after trading back a couple times in Keon Coleman. He projects to be their X wide receiver, who traditionally would be the number one option, but he profiles as a big slot. A slot plays on the inside off line of scrimmage, again, that doesn't necessitate beating press coverage. They have said that they intend to use him as an X, and they run a vertical scheme. So that means that their wide receiver runs vertical deep routes. Well, to do that, you preferably are quick and fast. He is neither of those two things. And so it doesn't make any sense the way they say, at least, that they intend to use him. So I don't think he's going to be very successful. So I'm going to go ahead and pick Curtis Samuel, who could be a Z receiver and a slot receiver and should be much better at his role. Whole bunch of quarterbacks go right in a row. I'm glad I already secured my 3, because if I hadn't at this point, I would be in danger and not have enough quarterbacks to select to field an ideal starting lineup, because backup quarterbacks are going at this point. So then a couple tight ends are off the board. I'm going to look at my roster here. So I have my QB 1, 2, and 3 locked up. I have my running backs, 2 starters locked up, all 3 wide receivers locked up, including a couple flex plays. Got plenty of wide receivers. So I'm going to look to select 2 tight ends here and 1 more running back. So I'm going to look at the running backs available and see if there's anybody with upside. So it looks like Evan Hull is available. Now I'm going to select Evan Hull. He's the second string running back for the Colts, and his profile suggests that he is a tremendous receiving option, which will help you with a safe floor if he can establish himself to get a couple catches a week. And in the event that the starter Jonathan Taylor would go down, he would project to have massive upside, because he would probably be splitting carries but get all of the passing work, and that at this point in the draft is tremendous upside. So now I only have 2 more spots available, and I do want to fill out my tight end room, so I'm going to draft a starter and a backup with these next 2 picks. So Theo Johnson is in a wide open situation. The Giants drafted Malik Neighbors at pick 6 overall to play wide receiver, but besides that, they are absolutely talent deficient across the board, and he could get a significant amount of targets and projects to have a lot of upside theoretically. And at this point in the draft, you want maximum upside. There's almost nobody with a secure role anymore. So we're going to go ahead and draft him. A bunch of wide receivers come off the board, more backup quarterbacks. A bunch more tight ends go off the board. A whole bunch of tight ends go off the board. So that leaves me with Darren Waller, who would be their starter, but he's almost certainly going to retire here. So that is one reason I drafted Theo Johnson in the previous round. So I'm looking for tight ends that present any semblance of upside here. Okay, so I'm going to look just a little bit further. Yes. Okay, so I like Colby Parkinson here. Now, he is the tight end for the Rams. Their incumbent starter, Higbee, suffered a devastating knee injury at the end of the year last year, so there is almost certainly no chance he has any semblance of an opportunity to play this year. So Colby Parkinson, they signed to a 3-year deal with enough guaranteed money that they're going to use him as a receiving option. So with that being said, I wanted to draft him to potentially have some immediate win-now production, while also giving a chance for the rookie Theo Johnson to step up for me at a later date. So, let's look at the team real quick before we conclude. So we have an elite quarterback in Anthony Richardson, who has the potential to be the #1 point scorer in the entire game. Then we have Jonathan Brooks and Trey Benson, 2 rookie running backs that possess elite upside. We have Amon-Ra St. Brown, an elite tier wide receiver, a top 4, top 5 wide receiver depending on your rankings, with absolute ability to be the wide receiver 1. We have Puka Nacua, who broke rookie records in receptions and receiving yards, who has absolute top 5 upside as well. We have Jackson Smith-Njigba, who I think will jump and climb up the depth chart to the #2 receiver for Seattle, and he is a fantastic short area athlete who should be a target sponge and provide a safe floor. We have an upside shot at tight end in Theo Johnson. We have a vet in Amari Cooper who projects to be a wide receiver 1 for a couple more years with Cleveland. We have James Conner, who is the other tandem running back in the Arizona backfield, so that way I have the starter for Arizona no matter what. Then we have Jared Goff, a safe superflex quarterback, along with Will Levis, who can be the bench quarterback and provide some safety so that if a starter gets hurt or if there's a bye week, I'm good there. Then we have Jalen Polk, who could be the wide receiver 1 for New England. We have Marshawn Lloyd, running back for Green Bay, Kamani Vidal, running back for the Chargers, Dontavian Wicks, who could be the wide receiver 1 on his team in Green Bay. We have Estime, who could get some carries and some run, and they had projected to get some run this year. Dante Foreman, who has a great shot at least the beginning of the year to get significant carries, including carries that could give him touchdowns. Curtis Samuel, wide receiver for Buffalo. He is in a wide open room, and he has a great shot at being the #1 or 2 or 3 option there at worst. Evan Hull, who with one injury could be a starting running back and presents a lot of upside. And Colby Parkinson, tight end for the Rams. So let's think about what I talked about before and what I did here. I drafted for upside. I drafted a mix of young talent and vet talent. So like I was saying, projects you to at least have long-term security and that your players won't age out, as well as win now production by getting a few vets that have secure roles at the top of their depth charts. I drafted players on the bench that have opportunity for touches, and opportunity for touches is crucial for your bench guys. If you draft people that are buried down the depth chart, it's a waste of time to have them on your roster, almost certainly. So with that being said, this is the Dynasty Football Strategist. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you and have a good day.